Hey, what's up everybody? So in this video I'm going to show you how to put Google Maps on your YelpCamp application. So I am at slides.com/nax3t YelpCamp-refactor-google-maps. I'll put this link in the description of the video, but if you have these slides pulled up then you can go ahead and follow along with them. I'm just going to be working through them step by step. So ultimately we're going to add this feature right here where we can add an address, what we're calling a location, to our campground, and then when we submit the campground it's going to geocode that location, get the latitude and longitude coordinates, and then it's going to use Google Maps to display that map in this little area next to our campground information. So I'm going to be working from Colt Steele's version 11 of YelpCamp. You can find it right here. Click on this. I've got it here in GitHub, and then in order to use it you have to go back to WebDev Bootcamp, which is the repository, clone or download. If you don't know how to use Git, then just download the zip file. I'm going to go ahead and copy this Git URL, and I'll do a git clone. This is going to clone down WebDev Bootcamp, and you're going to get the WebDev Bootcamp inside of a zip file if you do the download zip, at which point you'll want to extract all those files somewhere on your desktop, or if you're just working from your existing application, then you don't have to worry about this step. So we'll come back whenever this is downloaded. Okay, so it's done downloading. I'm going to CD into WebDev Bootcamp, see what we have going on here. I've got YelpCamp over here. So I'll CD into YelpCamp. I should have all the different versions. I'm going to go into version 11 and open that up in Sublime. Cool, so now that I have that open, I'm going to go back. I can close this now. And the next step is just reviewing what we're going to do. So we want to sign up for a Google developer account. If you already have Gmail, then you already have an account. We're going to get a Google Maps API key. We're going to restrict the API key, enable the geocoding API, get another API key for the geocoding API, add that to our application as an environment variable, otherwise known as an env variable. Then we're going to add the Google Maps script to our application, display the campground location in show EJS, and then we're going to update the campground model with the longitude, latitude, location, etc. Update the new and edit forms, add the location input field to those forms, and then update the campground routes. Okay, so if you don't have a Google account already, go ahead and sign up for one with this link. It's free. Most people already have a Gmail account, so if you have one, then go ahead and just use that. So you're going to go to this link right here and just make sure that you're signed in with the account that you want to use. I am right here, so I'm just going to click Get a Key. And it says, do you agree? Terms of service, yes. Go to the next. And we'll wait for it to load this up. Okay, so now that it's loaded, it's given us an API key. Go ahead and copy the key with this cool little button right here. We'll go back to the instructions and see what the next step is. So it's saying here that you have to select create new project. Apparently they've changed it a little bit, so I think this puts us right here on the next slide. We've got the key that we need, so we copy it and then do not click finish yet, which is down here. If we look, they're calling it done now. So we're not going to click done yet, and you're going to click on this API console deal, so we'll click there. Okay, now that this is loaded, if you want you can name it YelpCamp. There we go. YelpCamp under the name. And then back in the slides, here's the part where we want to restrict Google Maps API keys. So this step is crucial for protecting your API key. So from the restrictions page, we're going to select HTTP refers, websites, and then we're going to enter in the following URLs. So this step right here is only, if you're working locally. If you're not, go ahead and skip this step. If you are working locally, which meaning you're not working from Cloud9, then be sure to come back later and remove this. And I'll have a reminder at the end of the tutorial as well. Okay, so we want the Cloud9 preview URL if you're working from Cloud9. So I'm working locally. I don't need this, but if you're working from Cloud9, this is the URL that you get when you preview your running application. So you're going to preview your running application in Cloud9, and then you're going to copy the URL from the top, and you're just going to put an asterisk right after the main URL. So that says anything that comes after the main preview URL is allowed to access this key and use this key. If you have deployed your application, you're going to do the same thing for your Heroku URL. So it's going to be your preview URL, your Heroku URL if you've deployed, or your local domain or IP and port. Okay, so when you're done entering your URLs, click Save, and then see the next slide for an example. So I'm working locally. I'm going to copy this and go here and go to HTTP refers websites, and we'll plug this in and click Save. Okay, so there's YelpCamp. It has restrictions. There's the key if we need it for later, which we will. So we'll go to the next slide. You can see I clicked HTTP refers. I plugged in those 3 URLs. Right now I just need the one for what we're doing in the tutorial. Okay, so moving forward, now we want to go back to the Google Developer Console, sign in if you're not already signed in, and enable the Google Maps Geocoding API. So I'm going to click this link right here. The API is already enabled. So this is where you would have ended up had you clicked on this link, and you would have enabled it. Mine's already enabled, at which point I can go back and manage it. And if we go to credentials, we can see there it is, YelpCamp. I've got the refers, etc. Okay, so now that it's enabled, for me it was already enabled. Moving forward, now we want to get another key for the Geocoding API. So you're going to go back to the credentials page and click Create Credentials and select API key. So we're going to click Create Credentials. To get here, if you're not already here, you go to your project and then you go to Credentials on the left-hand side. And you should already have the first set of credentials that we created. Now we're going to create a second set of credentials. So we want an API key. It's the first option. Okay, and we'll click Close. So now we have API key 2. So we can rename that here in a second. It's got a little warning here saying that it's unrestricted, that you want to restrict it if you don't want quota theft, etc. So we're just going to leave it be for now, no restrictions. And we'll go to the next page. Okay, so we want to add the key to our application as an environment variable. So you can copy the key from the previous step and export it as an env variable from your terminal. This is the one that's not restricted. So you can export it as geocoder API key equals, and then you just paste in the key right there. Or you can also use .env. I'm going to use .env. This is a great tool for persisting environment variables in development. So I'm going to click on this link. Here's the documentation here. Really simple. Just install .env, so you can copy that. And we'll go ahead and install it. And then once that's installed, if we go back to Sublime and we go to package.json, you can see there's .env. And if we go back, it says require this as early as possible in your application. So copy this line right here, require.env.config. And we're going to go to app.js and put it at the very top, even before Express, etc. is required. So I'm going to save it. And since all the code here is using semicolons, I'll go ahead and put a semicolon there for consistency. Okay, so then they want you to create a .env file in the root directory of your project. So here in version 11, I'll create a new file, call it .env. Save it. It's going to give me a warning telling me, hey, dot is reserved for hidden files, blah, blah, blah. I say, okay, no problem, I understand. And now I'm going to remove that and put in geocoder API key. Let me make sure that's right. Yes, geocoder API key. So back under where my credentials are, I'm going to take the key that has no restrictions right here and say equals and paste it in. Okay, and then you save this file. So we can go ahead and close this, close that, close that. I just have this one with my credentials and the slides. And it also has something here about Heroku. If you're using Heroku, you've already deployed your application, this command will help you to take the environment variable, Geocoder API key, and export it to Heroku so that you have access to your key on your server. This is not in production what I'm working on, so I'm going to skip that step. Okay, so now we want to actually add the Google Maps scripts to our application. So we're going to open the campgrounds show EJS file that's going to be inside of the views directory in our code editor, and then we're going to paste in the script. So I'm just going to use this nifty little copy button right here. I'll open up show EJS, and if you're wondering, that's inside of views, campgrounds, show right here. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so you can read it. Go ahead and hide that. Hopefully this is big enough for smaller screens. So at the very bottom, in between the closing div and the include partials footer code, that's where I'm going to paste in the code that I just copied. Now there's one particular thing that we need to change, and that's going to be this key equals API key here. So now I'm going to go back to my credentials page and copy the other key that has the HTTP refers, and I'll explain why this one has restrictions and the other one does not in a second. So we copy it, we go here, we replace it, save. Okay, so the first one is being used for the Geocoder API. That's the API that we're going to use on the back end of our code in the routes file, where we're going to take an address and geocode it into coordinates. Okay, we can't put restrictions on that one or we'll get an error back. So what we do is we just make 100% sure that it's hidden from the outside world by using environment variables. That's what .env is all about. So no one should see this except for you. If this key gets exposed somehow, some way, then make sure that you remove it, reset it, create a new one. That way people aren't using your key and hacking using your usage limits and messing up your account. So the second one is a client-side key that gets exposed in show.ejs, which gets rendered out as a show.html file, or as an HTML file rather, that gets viewed in the browser. So anything in the browser is viewable to anybody. So all someone has to do is right-click, view source, and then they can see that key. So no matter how you try to hide it, someone's always going to have access to that key. Therefore, you have to put restrictions that say this key can only be used by these URLs. And that's what we did when we added the restrictions to our preview URL, to our local URL, which, mind you, is if someone wanted to copy it and make a ton of requests from a local server, they can very easily spin up a localhost 3000 server. So that's why you want to remove that restriction from if you're working locally, you want to remove that restriction when you're done working locally and developing. Meanwhile, the only one that you want to leave on there at that point is going to be your production URL, which will be like Heroku or wherever you're hosting it from. Okay, so that's why we have two different keys, and that's why we have to restrict one and not the other. And if you want, you can go to API key 2. You can rename this one to Geocoder. I keep putting my mouse over here, sorry. Geocoder, and save that one. And then this one will just be YelpCamp or YelpCamp Maps, whatever you want to call it, so you can have a distinction between the two. Okay, so moving forward, we've just added this in there. Now we want to go into our show.ejs file that we already have open, and we want to add a div where we're going to render the map. So we don't want to copy all this code. If you read here, it says make sure you put the div right after where you have this list group with the info1, info2, info3. If you already removed that info stuff, just put this div wherever you want your map to show up on the show page. So I'm going to go back to my code, scroll up to the top. Here's my list. Right beneath that div, so side by side with list group, I'm going to put a div with an ID of map. This is important because now the scripts that we added below are going to be able to find that ID, that div with that ID, and change it into a map. Okay, so I'll save this file and go back to the instructions, go to the next slide. So display the campground location in show.ejs. So we're going to open up the style sheets main.css file and add the following to our style sheet. Basically, this is just giving that div some dimensions, otherwise you wouldn't be able to see anything. Whenever the map gets added to it, if it doesn't have a width and a height, then it's not going to appear on the page. So we'll go to main.css. If you are looking for it over here, it would just be in public style sheets main.css. So at the bottom here, we'll put in map, Google Maps, yada yada, and save it. And on to the next slide. Okay, so now what we want to do is update the campground model. So you're going to open up /models, campground.js, and you're going to add location as a string, lat as a string, and LNG for longitude as lat and longitude as numbers. I think they could be strings too, it doesn't really matter, but the tutorial says numbers, so we'll go ahead and do that. So location, lat, long, we'll go over here, models, campground, and then right beneath description, we'll do location, string, lat, number, long, number. Don't forget the commas after each one of these if something comes before and after it. Colons between the key and the value here, and then just make sure that these are capitalized. Okay, so string, number, location, lat, long. Save that, that's our model file, and we'll go back to the tutorial. Now we're going to go into update, new, and edit forms, and we're going to put this code right here inside of new EJS, and we're going to put this code right here inside of edit EJS. The difference being the edit one has a value because that campground will already have been created and will have a value to populate into the edit form for the location. Okay, you'll note down here that I've added a label to the location input, and I suggest adding labels to the other inputs as well. For the sake of brevity, I'll go ahead and ignore that for now, but you can click on this link to see an example of how I added input labels to all of my inputs and therefore making the application more accessible. Okay, so I'm going to copy this code right here and go to new EJS inside of campgrounds, and we'll put the location right beneath the description and save it. And then the same thing here, go ahead and copy the code for edit EJS, open up edit EJS, and that's not working how I want it to. There we go. The command I'm using is just Command P on Mac. I think it's Control P, and then you type in the name of the file, and it's a quick way to get to files without having to navigate through the file tree over here. In any event, we're inside of Views, Campgrounds. There's the edit file, and there's the new file. So we've already done the new file. Now we're inside of edit. Down here below the description, we're going to go ahead and put in the location and save it. So these two are going to have the labels. I'm not going to add labels to everything else, but as a reminder, you can click on this link here and you can see how I did it in another existing application. So now we want to upgrade or update the campground routes so that they can geocode the location that's coming back from the form whenever it gets submitted. So we're going to install something called Node Geocoder. There's another one that I used to use called Geocoder. It didn't allow you to add in your Geocoder API key, so I went ahead and did away with it. So npm i-S is the same as npm install --save. And if you're using the newest version of npm, you don't even have to do the -s. It's already going to save it into package.json. This is just to cover everybody's bases in case you're not using the newest version of npm. So we're going to go here, paste this in, or just type it out, npm i-S node-geocoder. And then once that gets installed, you can see over here inside of the package.json file, it will get updated with Node Geocoder, and here it is. So we're going to open up our routes file for campgrounds, and we're going to add the following code to where we want to require our middleware. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to go to routes, campgrounds, and right below where we require our middleware is where we're going to set up Node Geocoder. So I just pasted in this right here. Basically, we're requiring Node Geocoder. We're creating some options inside of this object right here. We're saying the provider is Google, HTTPS, API key, process.env.geocoder API key. So this is where you would normally put in your API key. This is the one that we want to hide from everybody. So we put it in as process.env.geocoder API key. So that's all great. If you're using Git and you're putting your code on GitHub, then you're going to have a .gitignore file that tells you how to hide, or sorry, it tells the application what, or tells Git rather, what files and folders and code that you want to hide from GitHub. So if you don't know anything about Git Ignore or Git or GitHub, go ahead and check out my free Git and GitHub course here on YouTube. I have a playlist set up for it. It's like 45 minutes to an hour, maybe an hour and a half to get through the whole thing, and you'll know how to use Git effectively. So we don't have a Git Ignore file. I'm going to go ahead and add one just to show you what I'm talking about. So a new file inside of version 11, we'll call it .gitignore, and when we save it, it's going to give us that same warning. So we say go ahead and use the dot, no problem. And so inside of here, we can put any file or folder that we want to ignore. In which case, I want to ignore .env, and the reason being is .env has sensitive data inside of it. So if we're pushing all of this code or uploading all this code to GitHub or anywhere else on the web with Git, then people are going to be able to see this API key, and therefore the whole point of putting it into an environment variable to begin with, it doesn't make any sense now because people still have access to it. So we just want this file .env to be when we're developing, and we use git ignore to hide the .env file. And once we've saved everything, if you go back to your code, and if you're using Git, you can do a git status, and you'll see git ignore, but you won't see .env. You also see all these node modules, which we don't want the node modules either. So I'm going to put those in there. And again, if you're not using Git, don't even worry about this step. But now you can see no more node modules, just the files I've changed, git ignore, and package lock, and it does not see the node modules directory or .env, which is good. That means if we were to push this code up to GitHub, then people would not see it. If you're using Cloud9, just make sure under your share settings that your workspace is private. That way people can only view your workspace if you give them permission to. Otherwise, if it's public, then anybody can go in there and just click on your project folder, click on the .env file, and they'll be able to see the env environment variable that has your API key. If you're using Cloud9, you might even just want to export it from the terminal as an extra measure instead of using the .env package. You can go back to that slide where I introduced .env, and you can see where I also talk about the option to just export the environment variable with the API key from the terminal. Okay, so moving on, back in your campgrounds.js routes file, you have all this set up. Process.env.geocoder API key is what allows us to access the contents of that environment variable that we have inside of .env, and therefore we'll populate this right here with the API key that we need for our node geocoder to work. So I'm going to save this file and go back to the instructions and go to the next slide. So it's saying rewrite your entire router.post route as follows. So I'll just copy this code, go down to router.post, and we'll just paste this in here. And so you can see some things got added. Let's go ahead and look at it. We have post to / middleware.isLoggedIn, and then you collect the name, the image, the description, the author from the rec.body and rec.user, and then we use geocoder.geocode. This is, remember, geocoder right here from Node Geocoder with the options passed in. We pass in the location, which is 123 Main Street, Utah or Nevada or whatever, and then we send it to the geocoder API where it sends back either an error or data. So if it sends back an error or no data at all, then instead of showing the error to the user, we just tell them, hey, with a flash message, that was an invalid address, you gotta try it again. If you're having trouble with this, you might console log error just to see what it's telling you. It may be telling you something about your usage limits or something about your restrictions, etc. That's one way to debug it, would be to console log the error variable inside of this if conditional. So after that, we have data if there's no error. So we do lat is equal to, and then we take latitude from data 0. Data is an array first object inside of it has a property called latitude, same for longitude. And then location, instead of taking the location from the user, we take the formatted address, which is basically the location that the user entered in, except it's kind of a prettified version with maybe like the entire address with the zip code, etc. So then we create our new campground. We pass all these variables in that we created, and we do a campground.create, at which point, if we have a successful creation of a campground, we redirect back to the campground's index. You could also put a / here and redirect back to the rec.params.id. That would take you to the show page of the campground that was just created. So I'll go ahead and save this, go back to this code, or this slides, and go to the next one. Same thing here, except this is for our put route. So this is when we're updating a campground. So I'm just going to copy this one, go down to put, which is right here. Whoops. Paste over the whole thing, and it's basically the exact same thing over again. We're just making sure that you're the owner of the campground, and then we're updating the information, updating the location, etc., and then updating the campground. So we'll go ahead and save this. And okay, so I think this is the end of the tutorial. We're gonna go ahead and check through it, make sure everything's working, make sure we didn't mess anything up, and fix any problems if there are any. It says here, if you're working locally, don't forget to go back to your Google Developer Dashboard and remove localhost 3000. I'll do that in a minute whenever we're done working completely. So if you leave it there, someone gets access to your key. Remember, it's in your show.js view, so anyone can see it. If your site is on GitHub or Heroku, etc., then they could use it maliciously and cost you money or get your account suspended. Okay. So then it tells you, congratulations, YelpCamp app now has Google Maps feature, blah, blah, blah. Source code for the tutorial is here. So let's go ahead and test it out and see if it works. So I'm going to make sure that all my files are saved. They are. And then I'll make sure that MongoD is running. It is. And now I'm going to run node app.js. I actually use NodeDaemon to keep app.js running anytime the files get changed. Node app.js will work as well. And so now I'm going to go to localhost 3000. This is not going to work unless I go to app.js and I change this right here to 3000. This is specifically for working locally. If you're working on Cloud9, you can disregard. And now it restarted because it saw that I changed this file. And so from here, I can just enter that in. And here we are at YelpCamp. I can sign up real quick. Just create a user. There's probably already a user. Yeah. So the reason that this just popped up here and instead of on the sign up page is because of an error that is already covered in the course, so I'm not going to cover it here. But there's some code that has to be changed. In any event, this database already exists on my computer and has a user, so I'm going to log in. And apparently there's already one with a kitty on here. That's cool. So I'm going to go to add new campground. Name, we'll call it Hello World 2.0. Image URL, let's go to unsplash.com. And that is pretty cool. I'm going to copy this right here. Go to source. Paste this in, and when it pops up here in a second, I'm going to copy that, plug it in. This is a description. Okay, location. Yeah, sure, Yosemite National Park, California. And moment of truth, submit. We'll go to more info. Boom, there it is, and it's working. No errors in the console to speak of. So that's it. It's working. Okay, so now let's just double check the update feature and make sure that's working. So I'm going to go to edit, and you can either leave this here and submit it, and it'll keep the original one. Something happened with the image. That's interesting. So that's interesting. The only thing that's working is the location. So let's go back here and take a look at edit.ujs is using campground image, campground description, and then this one is called location. And if we go to campgrounds and we go down to the put, here you can see it's using rec.body.name, rec.body.image, description. Okay, so we need to update this code, and I'll go ahead and update the tutorial as well, the slides. Let's see here. If it's using name, image, and description, and we have lat, long, and location, then what we need to do is say rec.body.campground is equal to actually rec.body.campground .lat is equal to lat, and in fact we don't even have to do that. What we can do is we can replace this, and then we can get rid of that, get rid of this entire thing, put in rec.body.campground.long, and I'll explain what I'm doing in a second. And then rec.body.campground.location. Okay, and then here, instead of passing in new data, we'll just pass in rec.body.campground. Okay, so what happened was, on the new view, we're doing name equals name, name equals image, name equals description, name equals location. Therefore, inside of campgrounds.js for the post route, we can use rec.body.name, image, description, we add our own author, and then we do .location. However, in the edit, the way Colt did it, he has campground and then the name in brackets, campground name and image in brackets, description in brackets, and then down here I had location as just name equals location. So back over here in the routes, down in the put route, basically I'm passing in rec.body.location, which is fine because I can access location because it's name equals location. However, to get access to the name and the image, URL, and the description, those are inside of rec.body.campground because of how it's formatted with campground and then the property, campground and then the property. So what I'm doing is I'm adding to that object a lat property, a long property, and a location property, and then I'm setting those equal to the results that are coming back from the API call. So go ahead and set that equal to that, all three of these, and then here with the find by ID and update, we find it by its ID, and then we pass in the entire campground object that's coming in from rec.body that we augmented with the latitude, longitude, and location from the API call. Now, one thing to bear in mind, if the user didn't change the address, we would still be geocoding that address every time we do an update. Not necessarily the most efficient, because if they don't change the address, then why would we need to update the information in the database? So we could do some conditionals. For the sake of brevity in this tutorial, I'm not going to include that, but just to let you know, there's always stuff that can be optimized, and in this case, that's probably one of the things that I would optimize. Is I would go back and I would check and see if the user entered a location, and if they did, if it was different than the existing location. So in order to do that, you would have to look up the existing location, which would require a query to the database. So I'd have to think about it a little bit and try to figure out what's the most efficient, querying our own database or sending a request to the Google Maps API, the Geocoding API. Not a big deal. It works the way we have it here, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it how it is. But now let's go ahead and save it. We'll go back here, refresh. I'm going to have to log in, of course. And we'll go ahead and copy that image URL again, because basically what happened here is it didn't pull the name, the image, and the description from the edit form because of the way we had it structured. So now this is going to be name. We'll just do Hello World 2.0. This is assuming it's image, and then this is description. This is a description. Okay, so we'll submit it. it's all updated. Now if we go to edit, here are those values. If we submit it with nothing in here, it updates. It's just the same thing, it's fine. Otherwise we go here, we could change this if we wanted. And so we could change it to, you know, Tokyo, Japan, something like that. We'll just put an exclamation here. We'll make this 3.0 and we submit. And now we can see it's Hello World 3.0. This is a description. It's got the exclamation at the end. And now we're over in Tokyo instead of Yosemite. Okay, so that feature is working. If you run into any trouble with this, I'm going to go ahead and update the slides now when I'm done making this video. But if you run into any trouble as you're trying to implement it in your own application, feel free to ask questions and I'll be able to help you out there. Okay, so that's the end of the tutorial. And just a quick note, if you have a second, if you like my tutorials and you want to see more of them more frequently, then go ahead and check out my Patreon. I'll go ahead and put a link in the description of the video. Any support is welcome. It'll help me be able to take the time to keep producing this free content. Or if you haven't seen it already, check out devsprout.io/courses. This is where I have my Ajax course. If my teaching style doesn't completely put you to sleep, then you can get this course now for a limited time for $1. And then here in the near future, it's probably going to go up in price. But if you get it now, it's $1. Any support is appreciated. So yeah, Patreon or purchasing my course will really help me be able to produce more free content for my YouTube channel. If you have any requests, I get quite a few requests and I definitely listen to them and I put them into a list of things that I need to do. So I have a laundry list of different tutorials to create. But if you have any specifics that you want, things that you can add to your YelpCamp application or things you want to learn about Node or Mongoose or Mongo, Express, etc., then go ahead and ask those in the comments and I will note them and see if I can't add them into my future videos. Okay, thanks a lot and we'll see you in the next video.